Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 753. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, we feature our essay on the impact of hierarchies on engagement and fatalism. Like most things in life, the relationship is not straightforward. Hierarchies giveth and taketh away. If you don't get the balance right, you can say goodbye to engagement, innovation, and fun at work. We also have a visit from Tony Timbol, who brings his insights on the life cycle of user stories to the podcast in his To Tell a Story column. In this installment, we talk about the wall of confusion, when stories are created and then tossed over the wall to another team. Even high-performing teams slip into the slow lane. Hierarchy, fatalism, and engagement are intertwined by Thomas M. Cagley Jr., Megan E. Cagley. Fatalism in the workplace is the belief that you can't control or influence the work you do or how you do it. Engagement is a measure of commitment, motivation, and involvement. Engagement impacts a person's work, their colleagues, and their organization. An engaged person is passionate about their work. With few exceptions, hierarchy is a fact of life. Hierarchy defines a level of authority, responsibility, and decision-making within a company or organization. A simple definition that is often used is the chain of command. Hierarchy, fatalism, and engagement intertwine. The relationship between these concepts is complex. The right kind of hierarchy provides structure and mitigates risk. The same structure can at a moment's notice become a boat anchor. Hierarchy needs to be flexible and adaptable, agile to be effective and efficient. Unfortunately, most human institutions, once they mature, lose flexibility. My colleague Jonathan Lee states that hierarchy can have pros and cons. Quote, hierarchy can be good, providing structure for employees to focus on their roles to become masters of it. From a growth perspective, it may limit their creativity and ability to innovate because the hierarchy is there to maintain the status quo. Jonathan's statement highlights the complexity we face as we interact with real people in real organizations. Anthony Mercino, president of Vitality Chicago, gives voice to another potential downside of hierarchy. Quote, hierarchy can slow or stop innovation. If conversations with peers and related groups are stifled because things have to go up the chain for approval. As noted, all organizations have hierarchies, even families. The concept of hierarchy is fine until it passes the point where enough structure becomes too much. The overhead generates plaque in the organization's decision-making arteries. When decisions become hard to make and change, fatalism rears its ugly head. Determining how much structure is enough and not too much is not a simple algebraic equation. Hierarchy causes a differential of power between those at the top and those at the bottom. The technical term for how accepting or tolerant a person or group is of that power differential is power distance. While every person is different, several attributes can influence power distance. For example, national or tribal culture can influence power differentials. For example, Clearly Cultural has assessed the power distance for a wide group of countries. There's a link in the show notes for this. The data states that India has a high power distance, suggesting an acceptance of a higher degree of power differential. The United States has a lower power distance. The lower the power distance, the more people tend to challenge authority and question power imbalances. Power distance in a team or a company is not monolithic. Factors that cause variation include leadership style, team composition, and organizational culture. Organizational culture anchors the belief in hierarchy. Organizations with strong hierarchies hire for belief in the hierarchy. They generate rules and policies that reinforce and then defend hierarchy. I reread Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein this week. Okay, I listened to it. Same thing. Heinlein described how the mobile infantry enforced the chain of command through rules and punishment. While a novel, the same basic behavior is present in the workplace. Strong hierarchies use fatalism as a tool to repress challenges to authority. Returning to Jonathan Lee, quote, hierarchy reduces the ability to be agile and try new and different things as it requires hierarchy buy-in. This is even more challenging when the hierarchy is filled with managers rather than leaders. Every change agent must work on reducing power distance and the strength of the hierarchy, or they will fail. Change is not easy. Hierarchies will fight back. You will hear statements like, "That's not the way we do it here." As a change leader, you can fall prey to the narcotic of fatalism. Thoughts, comments, all welcome. Please feel free to reach out to us at spamcastinfo@gmail.com, or better yet, leave a voice message at 01-440-668-5717. We look forward to the conversation. Tony Timbol, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast. Tony, have you ever been on the Software and Process and Measurement Cast again?
Yes, I have.
Boy,
wonderful experience. Great to be here, Tom.
It is always good to have you. Tony, your column, the To Tell a Story column, really explores the whole idea of user stories and agile requirements and that whole development flow of that kind of information. Today, I'd like to throw a little bit of a curveball at you.
Ooh, I like that.
And talk about teams and teams of teams where people build out the user stories, they build out the requirements, and then toss them over the wall to an outside implementer or vendor that does all the work, basically in a maybe not a perfectly black box, but a somewhat black box, and then heaves it back over the wall at some point. How do user stories work in that environment? How does Agile work in that environment?
That's a great question. Okay. Actually, a question that I have real experience with, because in developing the Agile Ready tool, I had a third-party vendor, and I basically sent over an inventory of user stories that represented my particular vision of the product. I never sent a business requirement spec. I never sent a technical design document. That was, voluminous 200-page thing. I basically sent over a series of user stories, which communicated essentially what the value would be gained by the customer. And so the vendor then took that and he worked in a quasi-agile process. I don't think exactly. We didn't have Scrum meetings. I didn't attend daily stand-ups, but eventually delivered certain releases that then I was able to validate against the users that said, okay, so I needed to have an administrator. As an administrator, I want to be able to look at this particular dashboard. And so they said, okay, we took that user story. This is how we implemented it. So what user stories do, they at least give you the ability to create a connection between pieces of the system that's being delivered by a third-party vendor and what your intent was, what your solution intent was. And so they act as a better vehicle other than, a classic business requirements document, which has a ton of narrative text and a lot of information that you think is nailing stuff down, when in fact what you want is lightweight communication in the form of these user stories. Obviously, you can have some additional detail, like, oh, here's a list of design parameters and so forth. But they really work well with third-party vendors as long as you also use the user stories as your validation. In other words, okay, now I'm going to test what you gave me, but I'm going to test using the user stories.
Okay. So you own the testing, you own the user stories. How did they know how to translate that into a functional product? So was it those extra design characteristics that you used as sort of the guardrails?
That's a great question. So different organizations will have different tolerances for delegating design versus dominating design. Okay, so some organizations are going to be really careful about their design preferences, and they're going to want to communicate that, and that's okay. There's not necessarily wrong with that. So you would have a set of design stories, or at least design supplemental information that would be associated with functional stories that would give the third party vendor some guidance and guardrails. Or you could simply say, look, these user stories represent what I wanted to do. But as far as how you're going to do it and what it looks like, frankly, I really don't have a whole lot of preference or taste. Well, I'm going to trust you as a vendor to use industry standard design views and protocols and so forth. And so, in some situations, if you can relax your design tolerance, you can then get a working relationship that functions for you. Now, that can also go off the rails, right? You may think you have design tolerance, but you don't. And then you get something, you say that is not what I wanted. You got to start over from scratch. So there is a risk of doing it that way as well.
And that, of course, is in a firm fixed price sort of scenario.
Yes.
How does that work? I mean, with all that ambiguity and all of potential degrees of variability with a user story, how can you do firm fixed price?
Well, I actually did that. I did firm fixed price for the Agile Ready. And what we did was we had early feedback, right? You use the incremental principle. And they said, look, before you go too far afield, I want to see mock-ups. I want to see some working software and at least some prototypes. So you have to do the MVP concept first and early so that you have, within the first 10, 15% of the project time box, you should have some initial fast feedback or validation that they're heading in the right direction. That builds trust, that builds confidence so that they can continue in that fixed price. Both sides are taking risks when you go for fixed price.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So.
I mean, that makes a ton of sense. So in your scenario where you did this, you built that into the contract then, I assume.
Yes.
How did you decide to, and who wrote the contract for you? Was that a standard procurement group, or did you get people that actually understood Agile to write the contract?
Yeah, unfortunately, they did understand Agile and they did understand those milestone steps. So those was baked into the contract. I had a contract template I shared with them. They came back with their contract template. It was very, very close. I took their contract template, tweaked it a bit, and it was like, progress payments, all those good principles that can validate. So, I got the product that I wanted. Now, as it's evolving, right, as it's growing, they're my production partner, and so the relationship has gotten to a good working relationship where I can say, look, I need this set of enhancements. Here's what I basically want. Here's a set of 3 or 4 user stories that represent that. What do you think your design changes will be? What's the cost of the enhancements? And so that set the stage for basically an agile way of doing production support and enhancements moving forward.
So are you using some sort of cadence to do this, or is this more Scrum-bonish in nature?
More Scrum-bonish based on funding that I've got. And so we anticipate doing more work this year. We want to do some reskinning of the interface. I want to build some of this AI capability using the Chat GPT and OpenAI work to build the intelligence of Agile Ready to move into more of that machine learning stuff. So that's the next big enhancement for the platform. Right now, it's a fully functional enterprise edition with APIs that expose the inner proprietary algorithms that third-party product vendors can actually use. So we're working on getting that word out to the API community and to the product community and so forth. So all the user story ideas and principles and expertise as a coach, I'm eating my own dog food of actually developing this software in the marketplace and trying to make it make it go. So for me, it's been exciting. Now, so where it's going to go, who knows? You know, a software marketplace is a crazy place, but it's giving me real world experience. You know, validating and testing my ideas and putting where my money where my mouth is, because exactly is my money.
Super, super. And I think that's a great story. That real out of left field curveball. You're using GPT AI. You see that replacing you as a coach or a scrum master in the near future?
I think it'll help you as a coach and a scrum master. There's certain knowledge. So there's certain knowledge that should be accessible. Frankly, a coach, if he's good and honest, should be replacing himself. In other words, he should be working himself out of a job.
Amen.
Always.
Yep.
And so therefore, ChatGPT or OpenAI, that should not be a threat to a coach, because his job is to empower people so they don't need him anymore. So I like the ChatGPT stuff. I've used it. I'm trying to figure out a way to integrate into the product. So basically, rather than spend $100,000 to build AI capabilities, I'm just going to use ChatGPT and OpenAI to figure out how to build that into my product for pennies on the dollar. And so that's, if they're as good as they think they are, that'll be accomplished. So we'll see.
Tony, how would people continue the conversation? How would they find out more about Agile Ready? How would they find out more about your requirements book?
Awesome. So TonyTimbol.com, you can check out the blog there. There's a link to join the Agile Requirements Mastery newsletter, where you get the free copy ebook of the Incremental Requirements Readiness, Unleash Business Agility. There also will be a print edition. There's a print edition available for $7.99 if you want to get a hard copy of the book as well. And we'll probably get a Kindle version out there. I will.
How would people if they're going to get the hard copy of the book? How would they request you signing it?
They could. That's a good question. I have to figure that out.
All right. So stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Figure that out.
And Tony will tell us one of his to tell a story column.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tony. In Reread Saturday News. This week, we reread Chapter 4 of Team Topologies, Organizing Business and Technology Teams for Fast Flow. The title of Chapter 4 is Static Team Topologies. One of the underlying messages in this chapter is that team topologies should not be static. However, not being static isn't the same as playing musical chairs. Remember, read along, buy a copy of Team Topologies and read along. Link in the show notes for that. And links to all previous installments of Reread Saturday of Team Topologies. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 754, we'll introduce Pais Kostecki. Pais is a Scrum Master and coach. She will bring a Scrum Bond flavor to the podcast with a column on agile teams with complicated work input patterns. Pais begins her column with a bit of an introduction and a bucket load of experience-based advice. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?